This is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys. In 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Uh-oh. Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike? Leslie, guess what today is?
It's hump day.
Woo-hoo!
Woo-hoo! You know, I only ask Bedelia to play that opening Wednesdays when there is some good news. Hey, thanks for being here. It is Wednesday, April 9th. And the good news is that apparently, if you really want to get rid of tariffs, you have some corporate CEOs talking about how a recession's coming, and you have Elon Musk posting on social media along with his brother that the agent behind the tariffs, Peter Navarro, is a moron. He is stupid as a bunch of bricks, and then later posts, I'm sorry, I have to apologize to bricks because it was unkind of me to compare them to Peter Navarro. The angry blonde woman at the White House press office, oh, boys will be boys, talking about the feud between Musk and Navarro. So how does Trump get out of this? He doesn't want to lose Elon's money, but firing Peter Navarro would also make him kind of look like he was bending the knee to Musk. Well, we don't want that either. What's a guy to do? Well, how about this? How about we just pause the tariffs on everybody but China, because, you know, everybody knows that's really popular. Everybody hates China. So we'll actually boost the tariffs on China, and we won't say that we're getting rid of the tariffs on other countries. We'll say we're pausing them because, you know, we don't want anybody to be certain about the future. On CNN a short while ago, they were interviewing a woman who owns a smallish, medium-ish business. And, you know, she said that she imports a lot of her stuff from China. When the tariffs were announced, she tried to switch to importing some stuff from Cambodia. She said then tariffs were announced on Cambodia. And she said, even if I could manufacture she does these bags that are kind of like post-maternity carry-alls. She said, even if I could make the bags here in the United States and there is no manufacturing facility that is able to do that, she said, I'd still have to source my constituent parts, my ingredients from overseas because that's where they are. And she was asked, well, you know, Trump did this pause on tariffs. So, like, does that mean everything's wonderful? And she said, no. She said, because I don't know what's going to happen. Even with this pause, and it's been announced that it's for 90 days. What happens at the end of 90 days? Huh? What happens then? She said, I have a lot of American workers that my company employs. She said, I don't know. I may have to start letting some of them go, even with the tariffs paused, because, you know, I mean, she said, well, you know, what if they wake up tomorrow and change their mind? This has not been an administration that anybody can rely on. So she says it's, you know, this is what they're saying today. Who knows what they'll say tomorrow? And, you know, this is what has been reported a lot lately. And I've started to seeing, I haven't shared any of this sound with you yet, but I've started seeing economists and business people post about that the real danger is not tariff or no tariff. The danger is the uncertainty, the capriciousness of this administration. Even if something is in place on a given day that will help you, you have no reassurance it will be there tomorrow. And businesses work off of what they can try to know as clearly as possibly. And when there is uncertainty, even if today's news is good, what does that mean for tomorrow or the next day? Or, what if Donald Trump wakes up a week from now and decides to put these 75 some countries back on the list? Businesses have to plan for what they can count on. And the message this smallish, a large, small, or a small, medium business was saying today that she doesn't know what's going to happen. And when businesses don't know what's going to happen, they try to plan for the worst. So even with this lifting of the tariffs, pausing, get your terminology precise, the pausing of the tariffs on countries other than China. You know, Donald Trump wakes up on the wrong side of bed tomorrow. He might say, oh, the ambassador from Cambodia said something I didn't like. Tariffs back on Cambodia. Oh, and Donald Trump and the angry blonde woman keep claiming that all of these countries have reached out because they want to negotiate to get themselves out from under the tariffs. Well, that could be true, but there is at least one business analyst who has been posting on social media. He's an analyst for a financial firm on the business community. And he said that all of the people he has reached out to, not one of them has corroborated the statement that they have, not one trade representative from the countries he's reached out to has said that anybody from their government reached out to Donald Trump to try to get a negotiation underway. He says, to the best of what he is able to find out right now, that this idea that all these countries are calling the White House desperate to talk, he says he's seen no proof of it. He has seen no evidence that that statement is real. And isn't that just like Donald Trump? Remember, for those of you whose memory goes back, 4 years, Donald Trump lies. He lies all the time. Back when the Washington Post was independent, they started tallying his lies. By the time his term in office came to an end, and they did not start on day one. By the time his term came to an end, they had over 30,000 documented lies that he had told the American people. So are countries lining up? If they're lining up to negotiate, why would you stop the tariffs now? Wouldn't you keep the tariffs in place to continue the pressure on these countries so that they really would show up hat in hand? I think the most reasonable explanation for what we're seeing here is Donald Trump is trying to get out of this mess he made without appearing to capitulate to Elon Musk or repudiating Peter Navarro. Because firing Peter Navarro, which is what Elon Musk was leading to with his posts, that would look like, Elon doesn't like you, well, you've got to go. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? There have already been rumors reported in Politico last week that Donald Trump was saying things like, Elon really wants to get back to his businesses, and he's done so much for him. Personally, I'd keep him on forever. But, I don't think he really wants that. And apparently Elon Musk was a little offended by talk that he was going to be leaving his position of power in Washington, D.C. So much so, I don't know what was expressed privately, but a few days after the Politico reporting, the White House came out and said, "Oh, my God, that is so untrue. That is so. Elon has no plans to leave, and we love him here, and we want him to stay forever." I don't always like the writing in Politico, but I think it's really safe to say that they didn't make that observation by themselves, that there was starting to be talk about how Elon would segue out of government. They didn't make that up. Somebody told them, probably multiple somebodies told them that's what was going on. And, it's very possible that the people in the administration who shared that with Politico did it on purpose. A trial balloon, if you will, to see whether or not Elon pushes back if we float the idea that maybe his time in government is coming to an end. Shh, don't tell anybody. But reported in Politico, and then they reported it in Politico, and Elon got very upset, and the White House strongly walked it back. We don't know where that came from. That's just fake news. Oh, by the way, as you might expect, the stock market is rebounding a little bit today because of these announcements that the tariffs, at least most of them, are going to be paused. Peter Navarro was on Fox Business today, and he said, "This is one of the greatest days in American economic history." Really, Peter? Because you were the architect of the tariffs. You were the one who said this is a good thing and this is benefit the United States and this is going to bring manufacturing back, et cetera, and so forth. This is one of the greatest days in American economic history. I think we're going to call it the art of the reciprocal trade deal. All the nervous Nellies who tried to undermine us, Elon Musk, all the nervous Nellies who tried to undermine us consistently underestimate the power of the president. This is me, Peter Navarro, reminding the world that I am a world-class Trump suck-up. That is how I got my position. That is how I keep my position. And Elon Musk, he likes me just as much as he likes you. So there. I'm sorry, the sound effects were mine. I don't want you to think that that was part of the Fox interview. Nevada Congressman Stephen Horsford was part of a House Ways and Means hearing. This was probably, a couple hours ago. And they were talking to the trade policy ambassador, Jamieson Greer, who clearly, this is supposed to be Trump's number one trade policy guy. Trump's trade policy guy apparently got word about the pause while he was sitting at the hearing. Stephen Horsford references the fact that he obviously was just told about it. Somebody must have come up and whispered in his ear. The trade policy ambassador, the chief Trump trade guy, found out about the pause while he was sitting before the House Ways and Means Committee. He tried to put a good spin on, I was part of discussions where this was discussed. And Horsford's like, okay, fine. Why didn't you say anything? Well, it's not my place to recount my conversations with the president. Oh, my goodness. Nice try. Nice try, Mr. Greer. You can bet Mr. Greer made a very unhappy call to the White House after he got out of that hearing. Something to the effect of, seriously, dudes, you know I'm speaking before Congress and you humiliate me this way? This is actually a pretty good exchange where Horsford, asked Greer, are you aware that this is happening? Is this something that you actually know about? Stephen Horsford, I'm not familiar with this Nevada congressman, but I got to tell you, this guy was on fire today. This is really interesting. Listen to him asking, among other things, whether Trump's trade chief, his trade ambassador, knew what was coming. Was he aware of what was coming? Doesn't seem like it. Kind of seems like that person who just came over and talked to you told you about it. Anyway, listen to this.
Mr. Trade Representative, are you aware that the tariffs have been paused?
I am, yes.
When were you made aware of that?
Well, I understood the decision was made a few minutes ago.
Sitting here.
Under discussion.
Sitting here, under discussion. So did you know that this was under discussion, and why did you not include that as part of your opening remarks?
So typically what I don't do is divulge the contents of my discussions with
What are the
President
details of the
Congress.
pause?
Well, my understanding is that because so many countries have decided not to retaliate, we're going to have about 90 days.
No, excuse me? China increased their tariffs on the United States. Trump blinked.
What's the blink, sir?
What do you know about this pause? What are the details of it?
Well, the details, as I understand it, is that China continues to retaliate. Other countries didn't retaliate. The president 2 or 3 days ago said we wanted to negotiate with those countries that asked for meetings. That's what we're doing.
What are the details? How long is the pause? How many days? How many weeks?
I understand it's 90 days. I haven't spoken to the president since I've been in this
So the trade representative hasn't spoken to the president of the United States about a global reordering of trade.
Yes, I have. I've just been in the hearing with you. So.
But yet he announced it on a tweet? WTF? Who's in charge?
The president of the United States is in charge.
And what do you know about those details?
Well, as I mentioned...
it looks like your boss just pulled the rug out from under you and paused the tariffs, the taxes on the American people. There's no strategy. You just found out 3 seconds ago, sitting here, we saw you.
We've been discussing a variety of...
If you came here knowing that you were going to be turned off, that these tariffs were going to be turned off, why didn't you include that in your opening statement? Why didn't you reference that as part of your testimony?
Well, I don't disclose my conversations with the president, sir.
These were specific questions we asked you all along. What's the strategy? These are real consequences for the American people and small businesses. I had a group of small businesses in my office earlier today talking about the impacts of these tariffs on aluminum and steel. This is amateur hour, and it needs to stop.
And by the way, did you catch that what he said about why the tariffs are being paused? The White House is saying it's because all these countries are desperately calling the White House and they want meetings where they can negotiate an end to the tariff. That is not what Jamieson Greer just said. He said, well, the other countries didn't retaliate. So you put a tariff on Cambodia and Cambodia doesn't immediately impose a tariff on USA goods, so you're calling that victory? You're calling that victory. If a tariff against Cambodia was a good idea, why would you lift it just because you punched Cambodia in the face and they didn't punch you back? Nothing has changed if that's the case. Well, we punched them all in the face and nobody punched us back, so we've made an announcement we're not going to punch them in the face anymore. because they were good enough not to punch us back. That's what he's saying. Andy Miles just sent me a note. I said I wasn't very familiar at all with Congressman Stephen Horsford. Apparently, he was, up until recently, was chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. His district is in the Las Vegas area. Well, another person to watch. We've got a growing list of people, Greg Kassar from Austin, Texas, people we've never heard of before, but who are really stepping up and fighting the good fight. Well, I was going to share more with you. Have I gone on too long? I don't know. Let's see. We have a couple of minutes left. Well, you know what? Let's do Crockett's Corner. We haven't heard from Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for a while. She actually was part of a hearing where they were looking at the measles outbreak. Remember, Jasmine represents a district in Texas. Texas is where there have been more than 500 cases of measles, and 2 kids have died. RFK Jr. actually showed up to try to console the family of the second kid who died. Anyway, Crockett's Corner is here today. Let's listen to Jasmine Crockett.
Unfortunately, in today's times, Democrats believe in scientists and experts and data, and Republicans instead believe in conspiracy theorists. And right now, that is who we have leading one of the most important agencies in this country, is a conspiracy theorist, not someone who has an actual resume to get the job done. So why would anyone trust the Republicans on anything, let alone matters of public health and safety? It has taken Texas' largest measles outbreak in 30 years, with more than 500 confirmed cases and the death of 2 children, for the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to say what we already knew. The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. This is the same guy who chaired the anti-vax nonprofit Children's Health Defense. Just last month, during an interview with Fox News, he suggested that somehow being infected with measles could provide protection against cancer and heart disease. The Republicans are implementing the most dangerous public health agenda in modern American history, and people are literally dying as a result.
That was this week's Crockett's Corner with the lovely Jasmine Crockett. When this outbreak first occurred in Texas, RFK Jr. did authorize 20,000 doses of the measles vaccine to be sent to Texas. This is also the same guy, though, remember, who's one of the big leaders in Health and Human Services quit because he said that he was told he was supposed to go through all the data and find proof that vaccines aren't safe or don't work. And he quit because of that. What a world, what a world. Somebody dump a bucket of water over me, I'm ready to melt. We are going to take a break and be back with calls and texts right after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number 1 on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez.
My husband planned this out when I first started doing comedy. There could be 100 people saying kind, supportive, wonderful things, and the only one I hear sometimes are the ones calling me a liberal slut. So I got to flip that. That's why Republicans use hatred and rage and blaming somebody and othering somebody, marginalizing people, because it's effective. That's how our brains work.
Patty Vasquez, weeknights 5 to 7 on WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Want to join the conversation?
I just wanted to thank your station for consistently reporting the facts.
In a world of clickbait headlines, your station is who I trust for the real news.
Call Joan now at 773-763-9278 and join the conversation. Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on Chicago's Progressive Talk. WCPT 820.
And it is time to take your calls and read your texts. Eric from Montgomery texted in something that Lawrence O'Donnell was talking about last night and other people are starting to talk about, and that is market manipulation. Who did Donald Trump tell about the tariff pause? Because Donald Trump said something yesterday about, today's a good day to buy DJT, his stock in his Truth Social company. And like I said, he announces the pause, the markets go up. Eric from Montgomery said, if these tariffs are reversed next week, that will be the biggest market manipulation of all time. Trump's people will know about it, buy low, and then sell high on the way up. Trump, who did Trump tip off yesterday? Be very interesting to know how the market looked yesterday. Who was buying big yesterday? Of course, since Trump and Elon have defanged any kind of inspector general, any kind of effort to actually, assess whether or not there's been market manipulation or insider trading. Who's going to go after these folks? I'm sure they're confident that nobody's going to go after them. I agree with you, Eric. And people have been talking about this, the idea that Trump knows what to say to make the market go down. He knows what to say to make the market go up. You think somebody like Trump isn't going to use that to his financial advantage? Please. I got a bridge that's for sale. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Steve from the Gold Coast is on the line. Hey, Steve, how are you today?
Fine, thank you. Well, not so fine, but living through this chaos that many of us predicted would happen. We just didn't predict that it would happen so quickly, within the first 100 days of this administration, that you were able to do this to the American economy. But wrong, but in the wrong way. Having said that, the fact is that, Trump wants to propose this notion that, I'm not paying attention to the markets. I mean, I really am not following what's going on in the stock market. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. I guarantee sometime in the next 24, 48 hours, he's going to tout the market movement that this has created on the upward side. He's not going to, talk about the fact that we're still pretty much where we were on Monday at the market's close. So in other words, we've just returned the markets to about where they closed on Monday. Forget about everything that happened last week because we're still down in that regard. So trillions of dollars lost. And beyond that, it's just a 90-day pause. And what will that will do is it will actually create this sort of artificial buying fringe, in which companies, people, everybody will head out there and buy everything they can in anticipation of these tariffs being imposed down the road. So in other words, you will see the economy bolstered somewhat, except that once those tariffs go into place, then nobody's going to be buying anything, and they front-loaded their buying already. So that means that you'll be looking at a steep decline in terms of economic output in late summer and in the fall. So this just buys you a few months. And it also, I'm betting, it buys them some time because they know that people don't pay quite as much attention to what's going on. So when this actually manifests itself, it'll be the middle of July, and it's summer. People don't pay attention to what's going on in the news and so forth. So, whatever will happen will happen. And that's what they're betting on. But again, this is just a reprieve. It's like a stay.
Yes, exactly. And that's what business owners are so terrified about. Yeah, he did this today. No tariffs today. There were tariffs yesterday. What does that mean for tomorrow? Nobody knows. And you can't plan a business around uncertainty.
Absolutely. That is the single most important thing in a business environment is stability, knowing that what the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, and 5 years are going to look like. And with all due respect to people who might advocate some sort of reordering in terms of tariffs, this idea that companies are going to invest massively and bring back jobs to America and build factories and so forth, okay, you might be able to get that off the ground 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But who's going to make that kind of gamble, knowing full well that in a few years from now you might have a different Senate and a different House, almost certainly a different House, and then 4 years from now, less than 4 years from now, an entirely different administration who's going to undo all of this. So what you've now invested $10 billion in a factory to do what? To put out things that we're no longer going to manufacture because we can again buy them from China because we're going to then repeal these tariffs. I mean, that's the kind of problem that this creates. And by the way, the other problem with this is that he's promising this as some sort of a savior for manufacturing and average Americans and so forth. I have yet to hear anybody have a press conference talk about any sort of planning with regard to what you're going to do in terms of public policy to support organized labor, collective bargaining, all of these things, because it's not just having
Steve, there was an announcement from Apple that they were going to take some of their Chinese production out of China. Of course, they weren't bringing it to the United States. They're looking at India. Oh, so is that our goal? Let's make India great again?
Exactly. And assuming that you were able to bring back jobs to America. I mean, in the late 19th, early 20th century, America was the center of the industrial age and manufacturing. And you know what? Most Americans who worked in factories lived hand to mouth. Why? Because we paid them next to nothing. We paid them just enough to live and have to show up the next day. And it wasn't until organized labor came into its own and that we created that kind of bargaining power, and that the American worker, those people working in those factories, were able to demand a decent standard of living and wages. But there's no talk about that. So in other words, bring back jobs. Okay, we'll bring them back to Kentucky and Alabama and Mississippi and Texas, and then we'll pay you a minimum wage, because nobody is talking about bringing back those jobs and making what people used to make at GM 50 years ago. No, not controlling for real wages.
It's ridiculous. This idea that tariffs are somehow going to make everything be made in America again. It doesn't work that way. And here's the weird thing. I think even the average Joe who doesn't maybe pay much attention to politics or that, I mean, come on. You know that you don't just, in a month shift your production back to the United States. You've got to find a facility. If you can't find one, you have to build one. You have to work with the local municipality and go through the permit process. You got to draw plans. I mean, you're right. It is a multi-year process that is going to long outlive the Trump presidency. It's just a PR stunt.
Yeah, if there's any good news out of this, it is that he is alienating his big money, big donor supporters. I mean, those are the people who are losing this big money in the market. Those are the people who own these companies. And going forward, I mean, let's face it, they were mesmerized by the idea of extending those big tax cuts that he gave them the first time around, without once considering, for a moment that, oh, you know what, this tariff stuff, it might be real. He's not just talking out of his rear end. He actually is doing this, and it's going to kill us. So I may get $1 back in terms of the money that I'm not going to pay in taxes, but that hardly does me any good if I'm going to lose $3 in terms of our profits. So, they're starting to turn on him. I mean, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, has turned on him.
Yep.
And people
and
need
if
to understand.
Elon is publicly posting that Peter Navarro is a moron, can you imagine that he's holding back in person? And that I think the reason that he went public with his criticism of Peter Navarro is because he has been criticizing him for a while now privately and gotten nowhere with Donald Trump. So you know what? You up the stakes. You're not getting what you want. You up the stakes. And that's what Musk did. Steve, I got to move on. I got a bunch of people waiting to chat. But before I take the next call, the tariffs were not paused for China. As a matter of fact, the tariffs for China went up again, 125% now. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that not only is China retaliating with its own tariffs, they are using other measures. The Wall Street Journal describes it as Beijing's arsenal of tools to hit the United States where it hurts. China has a trade blacklist of companies that they refuse to do business with. That list has now grown, including a couple of a defense contractor, an aerospace contractor have now been added to the list. A dozen American companies, as well as those two, have been added to the list. China understands that it is the largest market in the world. Lots of companies, Tesla, do business in China. Lots of companies have factories in China. And apparently, since the last time Trump was in office, when he came after China that time, since that time, Chinese officials have been preparing for what they would do if tariffs were to be brought against them in the future. And it isn't just retaliatory tariffs. They're going after American companies who are either operating or investing in China or simply trading with China. This is somebody you don't want to be in a trade war with. And according to the Wall Street Journal, we are now in a trade war, not just tit for tat, but we are in a full-blown trade war with China, the largest economy in the world. You know, even with this pause, Elon is not going to be happy. He's got, what is it? Doesn't he have a factory? I think it's in Shanghai, where there are over 10,000 people employed. I believe that is part of the Tesla operation. Let's go back to the phone lines. Or should I take a break? No, I should probably take the break, Lady B. Let's take a real quick break, and we'll be back with the rest of our phone calls right after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Out Chicago.
If you think of every single thing from the Supreme Court to deporting these poor immigrants who are just trying to work hard and feed their families and have a better life, to the trans community that was thrown under the bus, you just wonder, where will the hate, where will the fear end? And if you keep thinking about it, like I just mentioned, it's a nowhere street mentally.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820. Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm taking your calls and reading your texts. Somebody texted in that they were listening to Thom Hartmann, and they said Thom Hartmann thinks Trump is playing the stock market. Wish we could find out who's buying the stock for him that has fallen in price before he put the tariffs back on. Insider trading much? There's a lot of people who share that sentiment. And Trump is many things, but when it comes to money, he puts the greed in greedy. And there is no way, there's no way that he doesn't understand that he can create market volatility. Everything goes down, you buy it cheap, and then you do something like, I don't know, a stunt like a 90-day tariff pause, and everything's going to come back up. And if you know that you're planning to put the tariffs back in place, you will sell and then wait for them to tank again and then do the same thing again. Let's go to Davis, Illinois. Jeff is on the line. Hey, Jeff, thanks for the call today.
Hi, John. A while back on your show, you mentioned that one of the major problems in the country is the right-wing media. And I agree with that. And the purpose of my call here is to spill some facts that Trump lies about nearly every day, and nobody calls him out on it. For instance, he's getting rid of all these immigrants because they're a threat to the country. Well, the truth is, the crime rate is as low as it's been since before COVID. It was that when Biden left office. He says the economy is a disaster. I've got to fix the economy. Guess what? The economy was called by The Economist magazine and the Wall Street Journal, obviously not left-wing magazines or tabloids, as the best economy in the world, and a strong economy.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're right.
This is, nobody says this. Fareed Zakaria on his show Sunday did a chart that showed how much wealth America has grown compared to other countries in the last 30 years, and we've left them all in the dust. And we got a disaster. The only disaster we have, and it isn't a disaster, is we got a huge deficit, but that's only been caused because the Republicans keep giving their buddies tax breaks. If they went back to the tax rates before Ronald Reagan, that deficit would disappear pretty quick.
Yeah. Yep. And I agree. And also, it's interesting, Jeff, I've gotten a couple of texts. I don't know. These are two separate people texted in the same thing, that apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene sold a bunch of stock right before the tariffs were imposed. Do you think she had information? If one person reports that, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But I've had two separate texters talk about how Marjorie Taylor Greene has been making money hand over fist by buying and selling stocks. It's a puzzlement. It's part of the whole corrupt administration. Jeff, thank you so much for the call. Really appreciate you dialing in today. Somebody else texted that another thing that China is going to be cutting off. China is a source of rare earth minerals. Lots of tech businesses use rare earth minerals. Remember how we were trying to cut a deal with Ukraine to give us a shot at some of their precious minerals? We're going to need that Ukrainian stuff more than ever going forward. Let's go to Hoffman Estates. Our good friend Dave is on the line. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Joan. Yeah, that with Trump and the Chinese, and that figure, that book by Sun Tzu, that The Art of War. It's been around a whole lot longer than The Art of the Deal.
And he didn't even write The Art of the Deal, because when he was running for president the first time, the guy who actually wrote the book, ghost wrote the book with no credit, talked about what a nightmare Trump was to work with, and how basically the whole book is fiction.
Gee, I'm not surprised. And what you're talking about with this insider trading, didn't Martha Stewart do a little time in prison for that insider stuff?
She actually was, the FBI came to talk to her about possible insider trading. She did not go to jail because of that, though. She apparently went to jail because she was convicted of lying to the FBI. So I don't know what she said to them when they showed up at her door, but that's why she actually ended up in prison.
Well, Michael Flynn did it twice. He got exonerated by Trump.
Yeah, really.
But talking about that with this, pause. If you recall, a couple of days ago, less than a week ago, remember they had that come out where he said the president has given a 90-day pause, and the market took off, and then they came out and said, "Oh, no, that's fake news. The president didn't say nothing about no." I think that was just a test run.
Yeah.
To see what the markets would do, and that.
Do you honestly think Donald Trump is ethical enough to avoid any kind of advantage, any kind of market manipulation that benefits he or his family? I wonder if we could see what stocks has Jared been buying, What do you think?
Oh, God.
I know.
Maybe there'll be Saudi stocks or something like that. But,
yeah.
and you're looking at this or the oil barrel. Oil price has been, $60, a little bit less than 60. It's been down a good $20 at least from a month or so ago. But yet it hasn't reflected on the gas price. And we're going to be seeing it jump up in about in a month after Memorial Day when the summer blend kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to the last one I was thinking about was, isn't it amazing where that ICE wanted the addresses or whatever of these people from the IRS, from the taxes, and
an official at the IRS resigned because she was being asked to provide tax return information to ICE so that they could go through tax returns and try to figure out who was not a legal citizen. So this whole smokescreen of we're only going to go after the criminals is just completely ridiculous. Donald Trump even said recently that if some American citizens get swept up in these raids, well, just the cost of doing business.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
but,
oopsie.
But this one, wasn't she like the third head of IRS already?
Yes, she was the third IRS official to resign.
In 100 days?
Yes, Mm-hmm. Yep. But, since January, I think,
But isn't it funny that even though looking back, they want to look at the tax form, we could never see Trump's returns. Remember, he was eternally under audit?
Yep, yeah, and even when he wasn't, we never did get. He's never released his tax returns. I think he doesn't want people to know. He's such a manipulator. If he has paid any tax in the last 25 years, I would find that surprising.
I remember they had released one of them, or he had paid like $750 or something a couple of times, and didn't pay another. And finally with the steel mills and all of that. Remember the first term, where he promised these people in Ohio that these steel mills will be back up again. And
remember the carrier plant in Indiana. He went there and he said management has agreed not to close this plant. Trump left, and within a year the plant was closed.
Yeah, they were all
anyway, Dave, I got to roll.
So you get somebody else.
You.
Thanks, Joan.
Thank you. I got an interesting text from my good friend David in Hawaii, who reminded us that it is not just the countries that we import goods from that got tariff relief, and that the penguins in the Heard and McDonald Islands are no doubt celebrating today. We'll have to see if there's any video of the penguins applauding the fact that their tariffs are on hold. Good grief. Let's go back to the phone lines. Jim's on the line from Chicago. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Joan. I wonder if the Security and Trade Commission still exists. It probably went the way of the dodo bird. But think of Cash Patel, who the FBI used to investigate stock swindles for years. You can imagine him looking into this? Possible. But let's say Trump has made a fortune and his friends at the golf course, whoever he imparted this information to, and they day traded their way to a fortune over the last 4 days. The Supreme Court, let's say if it does go to the Supreme Court, they'll say, no, he can commit no crimes as president. He's omnipotent as president.
It's all official acts, and we told you official acts get a pass.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an official act to manipulate the stock market. I hesitated to call today, but it's so obvious. When I woke up this morning, it's so obvious it's being manipulated. And think of the people that claim to know nothing about this. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, his family or somebody, these people will do anything for a buck, Joe. Anything for a buck.
Heck yes. Oh,
they got
please.
You don't have to graduate.
Though Jared does keep extorting money from the Saudis, I hear the Saudis, even though there has been no profit made by Jared's little venture capital fund, hedge fund. I don't know exactly how he has it structured.
Yeah.
He hasn't made any profit, but the Saudis have decided to put even more money into it. Imagine that. Just imagine that.
You think they're not trying to buy influence. But the point is, you don't have to graduate from Trump view or graduate from Trump view to smell a rat in this situation. but we've got to suffer because this is our lot in life, I guess, Joe. But it's so obvious that I'm glad everybody's talking about it today, because that's the first thing that struck me this morning. Was this is? Yeah. I mean, this is a day trader's dream. I mean, all you do is that golf
Trump
course.
Isn't making money off of this volatility, he's not as financially astute as I've given him credit for. This begs when you control it. You control it. You say a few words, the market goes down. And then you tell all your friends, now's the time to buy. And then you say a few different words, and boom, the market goes back up.
And who's going to investigate it, Joan? That's the problem.
That's exactly
who's going to investigate
There ain't
this?
nobody to look into it anymore.
And think about the people that are, have their 401k plans and their future tied up in this market. I mean, where's their conscience? Where's the conscience of these people? Anyway, Joan, that was the first thing that struck me this morning. Thanks for taking my call, Joan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Well, let's real quick. Ron, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to squeeze you in. So
yeah, I just want to say that most of the products from Amazon come from China.
Oh, a lot of them do. Yep.
And nobody's going to be paying attention to Trump pretty soon. How many times can you jump into an empty swimming pool before you wake up and say, why should I trust him?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I'm glad that a lot of Trump voters are waking up to the fact that this isn't what they thought they were going to get. But I really wish they hadn't created this horrible world that the rest of us have to live in. Ron, thank you for the call. We are going to take a break for news. We are going to talk to the lovely and talented David Orr when we come right back after this.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I am very pleased to welcome back the Senior Policy Advisor at Reform for Illinois, but you remember him, I'm sure, as Chicago's former mayor. David Orr joins us now. Hello, David.
Yeah, my long term.
Hey, it counts.
7 days.
It counts. You were mayor longer than I was ever mayor.
Yeah, it was 7 days and not impeached. So.
I saw your name recently quoted in an article that was looking at how updating computer systems turned into an expensive, cost overrun, late, something as simple as updating the computer systems. It's now late. It's now more expensive than it was supposed to be. And if I understood the article correctly, it's still not even done. Tell me about that and why you decided to weigh in on it.
Well, I weighed in on it because I heard they were doing it and they called me. But at first, we'll remind our days with some of the stuff going on in Washington, how valuable good research is. And newspapers free to say what they believe. So it's a great job by David Jackson and A.D. Quinn. And forgive
Enjoy
me.
it while it lasts, baby.
Yeah, there's one other woman from Injustice Watch, but they did it. It's really important, but it's a complicated issue because a lot of offices back around 2015, 16, 17 were trying to deal with the old mainframe in Cook County. Okay, and so they were looking for technology. Basically, they wanted to create new software to manage the assessments, tax bills, titles, records, and all that for about 1.8 million local property parcels. Okay, and I can't tell you because I don't know all the keys of how it started, but it started out in terms of offices with the Illinois State courts and the circuit court clerk. And remember all those pictures of the circuit court clerk with all those hundreds and hundreds of boxes? Mm-hmm. So they wanted to digitize all that stuff. So anyway, it was needed. Clearly was needed. It was the mainframe is old. It's still around, but it's very old. In fact, by the time they finish this one, there'll be other new technology.
Yeah, really.
But that's the heart of it. It's a mixed bag a little bit. It's true. There was clearly the company was called Tyler Technologies. Okay, and they talk about that in their very elaborate article. And then after those first two that I mentioned, they got a further county contract that brought in many of the rest of us deals with property, the assessor, the board of review, the clerk, the treasurer. I can't remember if there's anybody else in there. And there's been a series of cost overruns and whatever. But so a lot of blame to put on Tyler Technologies, whether or not they were not quite up for it.
Well, that was going to be my question to you, David. I mean, the article, if you want to go to injusticewatch.org, you can read the entire investigation. It's titled Costs Triple, Delays Mount in Vital Tech Contracts. And if you scroll down, they have a graph of what was supposed to be done, what the starting cost was estimated to be, and what the costs are to date. The starting cost for the work Tyler was supposed to do were supposed to come to $85.6 million. Currently, the bill is $265.6 million. And part of it, at least part of it, is severely delayed. 5 years, 10 years, nearly 2 years. David, is this a question of somebody hiring the lowest bidder and not taking into consideration other factors, like are they capable of doing this work in a timely fashion? Because that's always been the argument when people say, oh, well, they didn't go with the lowest bidder. But sometimes the lowest bidder turns out in the end not to have been the cheapest way to go, or the most efficient, or the most timely, or the most economical. Do you get a sense that that's what's going on here?
I get a sense that it's complicated. I get a sense that, yes, there's many things that this company didn't know because they're a fairly new company out of Texas that didn't particularly know about Cook County. And it's important to know a county the size of Cook and what you're going to be doing. That's part of it. I think part of it is just you need really sharp people doing your contracting because these vendors kind of know what to do. They'll promise, they'll know they get some more time. They get their hooks into you, okay? And even though there's been a lot of complaints about them, but you want them to finish. You want to bring in a whole new person and start all over. So
exactly, because then you feel like, oh my God, then it's going to take more time and it's going to take more money. Let's just stick with the company we're with. But at some point, you do have to cut your losses.
Right, and I think that's what people have been screaming about for some time now, about how do we do this? We'd have to get more out of them or cut the losses, et cetera. But I also want to say, despite the weaknesses clearly of Tyler Technologies, which the article has pointed out, and the Tribune editorial as well has pointed out, keep in mind they didn't get all the cooperation they should from the various county offices. Remember, and you've heard me talk about this before when I've talked with you about the Board of Review. In Cook County, we've got the assessor's office and the one was run under Berrios, and then under the Cook County Board of Review, these groups do not want to have the kind of transparency that we all wanted to have in the other offices. They because of the way things are so political there and patronage and all sorts of old things, they wanted to be free to kind of make those tough decisions about what the property taxes are going to be or assessments are going to deal on certain properties. So the point of all that is part of it has just been slowed down by what they didn't know, slowed down by particular things in the assessor's office and the Board of Review. In fact, the Board of Review is still a long way from being done. But there's a lot of lessons learned here. We've always heard about this, about the messy situation in contracting. Contracting is so important, but where there's a lot of political involvement, and the political can be the inside deal, the old daily machine. There's all sorts of political factors that shouldn't be in there. They're often made unless you've got a really good contractual department that doesn't let that stuff get to them. And the other part of that is the money in politics, which is as bad as ever. I hate to say that because we've had some reforms, but not enough. And you see it in the private sector even more. But, there's the word bribe is a loosely used word, but a lot of favoritism and so forth. So we put all that stuff together, and nobody did enough of what they should have done to investigate this firm as much. We all talked about it. We all wanted it. We needed it. It's been a big help in a lot of ways, the stuff that Tyler did. But I guess the bottom line is the authorities in charge just didn't do enough to make those tough decisions. I wish I knew more about I know there's a political story behind all this, and maybe the authors will follow up some stuff on that too. But particularly the money that flowed before this from Tyler Technologies to some of the elected officials may tell us more of a story of what other connections there were, because I do believe, like in most things, there's political connections to some of these decisions made. And I've had my battles, particularly not in city council, because I wasn't in charge of anything, particularly there. I was just an alderman. But as county clerk, I had to battle the contractual department a number of times. And the most recent time was, I don't know, maybe a couple of years before I left, that they were really getting on me, the county board and others, whose names I'm not going to mention, wanted me to go with this one contract, and I refused to because it's a company we had, and they really messed up. But I think there was a racial motive involved. But the bottom line is I just said no when they finally backed off.
David, can you explain something to me? You talk about the contractual department. So if you're working in government and you need to hire somebody to do something, you don't do it directly. You go to the contractual department and say, you need to find me somebody who can do X, Y, or Z, and then they come back to you? I'm confused.
Yeah, in this case, that was it. You can do both ways. There are some things that you can make a decision your own. You make a decision, you go through your own bidding process, and then you go to the county board and convince them, et cetera. But most things are done out of the contractual department in the county. Okay, because if it ultimately goes there for approval.
So in this instance where the contractual department came to you and said, we want you to use this company, and you knew that they had not done adequate work in the past, you obviously didn't find that company. They did, and they came to you and they said, here's who we think you should use. Is that how it works?
I'm not sure about that exactly. We may have hired them initially, meaning my office, county clerk's office. The thing I'm talking about is when there was renewal up. And we did not want them, and powers that be at the county wanted them for, I believe, political and racial reasons, and I just said no. This one, most of them talk about, there was input from the various offices, assessor, treasurer, clerk, circuit clerk, et cetera. But the key was still, the key was done between the president and the contractual department. There's a better name for it, but the contractual department. I'm not trying to throw the blame on them. Like I say, I think there's other factors that we don't know yet as to how this Tyler Technologies was created. The Tribune's article said something about why didn't we go with a company that's known, has more experience, et cetera, like Accenture. So it's a political process. Ideally, it's free of as much political interference as possible, but there's plenty of it still in Cook County and Chicago. So it's just an important lesson because you see the cost figures. You expect vendors sometimes will underplay a little bit or want a bunch of money up front. But you see it at the federal government with all the talk going on right now. You see it in the county and the city. And then you see the other key lesson from all this is the money in politics. And it's hard to know when you go back that far who the key players were behind the scenes that got us this contract to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for explaining that. It was a little cloudy. David, we need to take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff you've been doing for Reform Illinois. I know that just last month you did another edition of the podcast that you do with him. I think you talked to Cam Davis. I want to talk to you about that. And I also want to get your take on what somebody like me who has this forum, what should I be paying attention to? What are one or two things, either races or people or issues or potential laws or concerns you have that maybe I could focus on a little bit more? David Orr and I will be right back after this.
Facebook. Message us.
Instagram.
Follow us.
Twitter.
Tweet us.
They keep me connected.
Let's get social on the socials. WCPT 820. Dive deeper into the heart of the news and stories at WCPT 820 and across the Midwest by checking out our website, heartlandsignal.com.
It's the coverage I can count on every time.
For the latest news updates, in-depth analysis, compelling stories, comprehensive election coverage, live streams, and thought-provoking opinions, head to heartlandsignal.com.
When I need to know, they're there.
They keep me informed and updated wherever I am.
Stay informed with WCPT 820, your go-to source for where facts matter.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Former Chicago Mayor David Orr is now a senior advisor for Reform for Illinois. And with Reform for Illinois, he does a podcast, Politics 101. He does it with Alicia Kaplan. And about a month ago, David, you sat down with Cam Davis from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. Tell us why you wanted to talk to Cam and what was important that we should take away from that conversation.
Well, I wanted to talk to Cam. This is, you might say, a little more intellectual in some ways, but people rightfully are concerned about the environment, in the whole Cook County region, and they don't generally know enough about the Water Reclamation Board. The Water Reclamation Board is a very powerful agency. It's not because there's some very few parts out of Cook County. That's why it's called the Metropolitan Water Rec, as opposed to just otherwise it could be part of Cook County government. But people need to know about these things. And Cam, remember for a long time, a lot of the people there were just the insider politicos, didn't really know much about the environment or the water, et cetera, et cetera.
It was a good launch pad, as I understood it. If you were interested in higher office, it was a good role to be in because you could basically run for something else and keep the job.
Yeah, and it was pretty much old school politics, and they had something unique. They had 6-year terms, whereas state reps have 2-year terms, and people like me, county clerks, we had 4-year terms. But they have 6-year terms, which means other offices can come up all the time. So you always see people who are water reclamation commissioners that are running for other offices. Okay, but they've also got some better people in there, like Cam Davis. So the key is that he just went into a lot of stuff, particularly about the water, and it is pretty amazing what we do. How much I don't have the figures in front of me right now, but how much wastewater we treat and what they do to make it clean when it all comes out of sewage and toilets and everything else. It's pretty amazing. And I didn't want to forget to say that, remember, Cam was a key environmental advisor to President Obama.
And as I recall, and this is a real test of my memory here, when he first ran for Water Reclamation District, wasn't he a write-in candidate? And didn't he succeed getting written in because he was so popular?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to do, to win a write-in campaign like that. But yes, that's probably the political high note for his career, that he was able to pull that off. And that was very significant. Of course, being a top advisor to Obama was a big help at that time. So Cam just explained a lot of things about how the board works, particularly, but mostly talked about how they deal with all these challenges in the environment and water, and particularly Lake Michigan and the river and stuff. So it was just very enlightening. And people, if they still want, they can go to Spotify or Apple and find those podcasts. This one's not very old. And on that note, let me just mention, because you mentioned Reform for Illinois, that I work with these days. We're in the process of putting together a series. I'm not sure it's going to be 3 or 4 podcasts, but a series about money in politics, on other reforms that have been sitting for a long time and kind of waiting to happen. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's the whole issue of the Office of Inspector General and its ongoing battles with the mayor's office in Chicago over what at least the OIG, the Inspector General's office, believe is interference from the law department, from the city. Then there's other issues. And one of the ones that's most dearest to me is the special law that says, both in Chicago and Cook County, that if you're a vendor, of which we have many, like we're talking about here with Tyler Technologies, you can only give $1,500. I shouldn't say only, because that's a lot of money, but you can give $1,500. It's not like some other place where you can just give anything. So it's a limit on that, because we see so much direct influence of money in politics. And the problem is, I wouldn't be surprised when we're through with all this Tyler Technologies, we'll find more about that. But unfortunately, because I was involved in the laws both in the city in 1987 with Harold Washington, and the one in the county, which I believe was about 1994. But since that time, people have been driving trucks through it. In other words, it's still an important law, but we find so maybe the company gives candidate X $1,500. Okay, but then we find out that the executive's wife gives this, and this other person gives this,
and each of their 4-year-old twins gives this amount. Yeah,
it's almost that absurd. But anyway, and there's some very good suggestions in there. Alderman Matt Martin has a proposal that takes some of the language similar to what they did in New York to clean up their similar problem, but it's sitting. Okay, and it's so hard to pass any serious ethics legislation. And frankly, probably the most important person in the last 40 years or 50 years doing about that was Harold Washington. Because when we passed the ethics ordinance in 1987, most mayors don't want this. Partly Matt Martin, who was a big backer of the current mayor in Chicago, there's been some real tension there, because the mayor had one of his allies send several of these issues that Matt's working on to Rules Committee. And then, of course, they have to fight for months at a time to get them out. But anyway, we'll have a series. I'm not sure if it's a 3 or 4-part series coming up pretty soon on that. I'm talking to a lot of key people. Hopefully,
David, it's one of those things where everybody wants, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, everybody wants money out of politics. Everybody wants reform. And yet I've been hearing the same thing for so long. And it's like the people who finally get elected, it's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And we're going to think about it, or we're going to study it, because now we're in power and we like the idea that all this money could potentially be coming our way. I mean, it just seems like it's never going to happen.
Well, remember, some things happened, like I mentioned. So some good things have happened. There's actually been more good stuff happening in the city and the county of Cook than the state. The state's been really tough to move things. But it's the absolute real world of power and money. Like we see in the federal government and so forth. It's there. It's very hard. In other words, it's clear that the voters, the voters would like to see some improvements. And there's legal issues associated with, of course, and you've got to be careful. And then, of course, the extreme harm that the Supreme Court did several years ago, that hurt, too. But, yeah, it's in other words, some of the politicians get elected. They don't like to talk about ethics too much if they're just going to go back on that. Okay, so anyway, it's very difficult. That's what I was saying before, that Harold Washington was so significant because in this case he was able to force aldermen to go along. He had to force a lot of his aldermen, his supporters, to go along with that legislation. And even Ed Verdoliak, remember Ed Verdoliak, who later switched to the Republican Party, he was going to support that because he wanted to run for mayor and felt it was too critical to be opposing it in a tight election like that. So sometimes you have to look for those circumstances politically when a mayor who may not be supportive will actually end up being supportive because of a close race and they can't be on the wrong side of that issue, if in fact the activists and leaders can make a big political issue out of it. And then everyone needs the media for that and sometimes money. But so, yes, it's the real world of people's views and a majority of folks what they want versus what happens when the big money gets applied here.
When is this new podcast series tentatively scheduled for?
It should be, the first one should be in the next couple of weeks. It'll go, there'll probably one in April and then a couple in May.
Cool. Send me the information and I will remind people to look for it, okay?
Good, yeah, because there's been some good work done there. Matt Martin and some others in the coalition, the BGA, has done a lot of good things. There's a network, the Reform for Illinois and BGA and others work together on, along with some, of course, there'll be some more stuff about some election things, but that's in the hopper right now. And most of us, of course, are focused on the national scene, as crazy as it is.
I'm going to have to get you back on the radio because we have more things to talk about. But right now, we are out of time. David Orr, Senior Advisor for Reform for Illinois. It has been too long, and we will make sure we get him back on the schedule sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, David.
Oh, you bet. Thank you, Joan.
We're going to take a break and be back with more after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
What an absolute perfect day to talk to John Lothian. I did not know that the whole tariff thing was going to take such an abrupt turn today. I actually wanted to talk to John about other things. John Lothian, of course, does the John Lothian newsletter, read by thousands of people who work in business and finance. John, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. It's nice to be back with you.
I have a question. Donald Trump this afternoon said that the reason that he paused so many of the tariffs today was because people were getting yippy. Yippy. Is that a financial term, John? And if so, what does it mean to be yippy in the world of finance?
I don't quite know what yippy is. Supposedly, this had nothing to do with the volatility in the market, which I would probably correlate with being yippy. But I would say that that's his way of saying volatility.
Now, I want to be clear. I'm saying yippee, not yippee, which we would be yippee. Everything is great. No, yippee is like everybody's scared. Everybody's nervous. Were you surprised, when Trump bro Elon Musk took to the public forum of X to just eviscerate Trump's other bro, Peter Navarro, who everybody is describing as the architect of these tariffs? Elon Musk called him a moron, said that he was as stupid as a bunch of bricks, and then he said, I have to apologize to bricks. I should never have compared them to Peter Navarro. He also said some other things where he used words that I am not going to repeat. Trump was in a bad place. Two people he really loves were having a fight, or as the angry blonde woman in the White House said, it was boys will be boys. So is this his way out of that conflict, John?
I don't think it's his way out of the conflict. He didn't stop tariffs. He just stopped tariffs on those nations that basically wanted to engage in negotiations with him. And so if somebody is willing to have peace talks with you, you don't wage war on them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we saw today, that there were a number of nations, 75 is the number I heard, that that he said he wasn't going to put tariffs on. He is still putting tariffs on, China and Canada, Mexico, and 10% across the board, otherwise. But, it's all about retaliation, and it's about fighting back against him. And yes, the market had reached a pinnacle of uncertainty and lots of pain in the stock market. But more importantly, this is a key week in the bond market. And we saw a very bad auction at the short end of the curve.
Okay, explain to me, who's not a financial person, what you're talking about and what you looked at and why you think it's significant. And try to use words of one syllable if you possibly can.
Yeah, so we had an auction of, I think it was the 10-year Treasury yield jumped by 0.3 percentage points to 4.3% Tuesday, which was an unusually large move for this typically stable asset. And then you had the sell-off get worse after a $58 billion 3-year Treasury auction drew the weakest demand since 2023, whereas the Treasury dealers were forced to take on 20.7 of the offering, which was the highest percentage in nearly a year, which means that a lot of customers didn't show up to buy, and so the dealers were forced to buy. And so that means that rates were higher.
When you say customers, are you talking about regular people like me? Are you talking about businesses? Are you talking about governments?
I'm talking about everybody.
Okay.
That's about everybody. That's individual investors, that's institutional investors, mutual funds, that's foreign countries, that's anybody, central banks, that's anybody that wants to buy the U.S. Treasuries. Okay. And the problem with that is that later this we have some upcoming auctions of $39 billion of 10-year notes and $22 billion of 30-year notes later this week. And who's going to want to be buying our treasuries if, we keep picking fights with people, right? And if the rates are going higher and all. So sometimes, if you were in the trading pit, you just stuck your hands in your pockets and you didn't bid. You just waited for prices to fall low enough to where you decided, all right, it was time to buy. And so, that may have been the thing that triggered it. A lot of times it's the bond market that will really, really put pressure on presidents.
Really? More so than the stock market? Why?
Because the bond market is what costs the government money. We have a huge amount of government debt that we pay interest on, and interest is a huge part of the budget. The stock market, that's that's the economy, and that's what everybody has in their portfolios or whatever, and that's all great, but it's what the cost to the government is the bond market. And if you go back to President Clinton, when Bob Rubin became the Treasury Secretary, everybody assumed that with a liberal Democrat coming in, the progressive Democrat coming in, that the bonds were going to go down. But Bob Rubin, convinced Clinton that he needed to sweet talk the bond market, and the bond market went into a historic rally. And those lower interest rates did more to spur on the economy than anything else that, Bill Clinton could have done.
How do you sweet talk the market? Oh, you're so pretty today. Have you lost weight?
Yeah. No, you sweet talk the market by telling the right people or publicly that you're not going to do anything stupid, and we've seen a lot of stupid in the last couple of weeks.
Wow. Okay. I'm speaking to John Lothian. He writes a newsletter that is a must-read for a lot of financial and business folks. When we come back from this break, John, you mentioned uncertainty. That's a word that I've been reading and hearing a lot lately, and I want to talk to you about that. John Lothian and I will be right back after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by John Lothian. You can read some of his articles at johnlothiannews.com. It's also where you can sign up for one of his 3 newsletters that go out on a regular basis. When we were talking a couple of minutes ago, John, you referenced uncertainty. This morning on CNN, a large, small, medium business owner was being interviewed, and she said that even with this pause in tariffs, she might still lay off or fire some of her American workers because she felt uncertain about the future. Sure, there were tariffs, and now there's no tariffs, and tomorrow there might be tariffs again. I've also read some published essays by economists that are saying that the damage that our volatile White House is doing will last long before there's any kind of either correction in their behavior or they get voted out of office, because when uncertainty takes hold in the business community, it's really hard to shake. So, what do you think? Is there so much uncertainty now that no matter what comes out of the White House, it's going to continue? And how do we reassure people in the business community?
There is a lot of uncertainty, and that's good for the markets in terms of trading, the exchanges, the brokers, and all of that in the short term. But in the long run, it undermines the confidence in the markets and the economy and the underlying economy that drives it, and the people that have to make those decisions about funding or employment or whatever. And so it's hard to do that. You know, the metaphor that people many times will use for leadership is they want a steady hand on the tiller, you know, equating it to sailing. And if you don't have a steady hand on the tiller, if you're constantly making adjustments, it slows the boat down. And that's the risk here, is that by zigging and zagging so much and having so much jiggling back and forth on the tiller, that we're slowing the boat down to the point that we're losing the race, and that the economy will slow, it'll go into a recession, we'll be in last place, and there will be layoffs. There will be all of the things that happen in recessions. And the problem is that if you go into a recession, if you see that type of negative growth, while you've got higher interest rates because of some of the problems, the other problems that we've talked about, now you've got something called stagflation. And now that's a real problem. And so, yeah.
Does stagflation mean a recession?
Well, it means negative growth and higher interest rates. Normally in a recession, you would want to lower interest rates. But if you're lowering short-term interest rates at a time when you've already got inflationary pressures, then you are creating more inflationary pressures. And the problem with tariffs is that they can ignite inflationary pressures, and that's the problem. Normally, because of a globalized economy, you've got different places where you can either find lower cost goods or another supply if you're short or something like that, where you can offset the risk of higher prices. But if you are dependent upon just nationalized supply, or you have higher prices because you have tariffs that have been put upon you by a trade war, then you've got. And in the case of China versus the U.S., I mean, we're up to 125%. What's the next bid, right? It keeps going higher and higher day by day in terms of what that is.
Well, and the Wall Street Journal is reporting that after the last Trump administration, or the first Trump administration, when they were hit with tariffs in that time, they have been coming up with a plan that it isn't just retaliatory tariffs. It is a plan to basically hurt U.S. businesses where they live. You know, I mean, you talk about globalization. I mean, there are a lot of U.S. businesses that either want to sell stuff to China, they've got factories in China, you know, and they came up with a plan that, you know, they have that, they have a sort of a blacklist for trade, and they're starting to add, as of this morning, the Wall Street Journal was reporting there were at least 14 American companies being added for the first time to the trade blacklist. I mean, in this, this doesn't seem to me that in this trade war with China that anybody wins. It seems like a lose-lose to me, John. How do we win with this?
You don't. Nobody wins in a trade war like that. There are no winners. So it's just stupidity after stupidity.
Oh, by the way, I was looking up through the Wall Street Journal to try to teach in the break to teach myself something about the bond market, and you, not surprisingly, were absolutely right. It wasn't a response to what's going on. At least he says it wasn't a response to the stock market. It said that President Trump had been watching the bond market closely, and it was in the bond market where people were queasy and yippy. Those were the yippy people. That's why he had to do what he did. Hey, another thing, there are a lot of people texting me, as they often do during my show. A lot of people are really suspicious and calling what's happening market manipulation. If there is market manipulation, if members of Congress or folks in the White House are making money off of this, tariffs one day, no tariffs the next, market goes up, market goes down, would there be a way, with the way our government has been neutered, who's going to look into that, John? Who's going to be the one to try to figure that out?
Well, that's a great question. There are still very good people at work at the SEC, at the CFTC, and other governmental bodies that are at work. There are still university people that do research, that look into some of these types of issues and find this kind of stuff. There are investigative reporters that find stuff. The LIBOR scandal was reported by a journalist, and it was read by a CFTC employee in, I believe, the Financial Times. And that started the CFTC investigation into the LIBOR scandal. Now, the CFTC does not have a subscription anymore to the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and so
somebody's going to have to find a payphone to give them a call.
Yeah, so they're so they it's a little bit hazier in terms of how that information is going to get to them. But there's still very good people there working very hard, and I wouldn't give up on them yet.
All right. I will hold out hope a little longer. John, do you have a favorite economist?
A favorite economist, living or dead?
Okay. Well, that was a little wider field, but let's open it up to living and dead.
Well, you got to start with Adam Smith and all of that.
Okay, then now let's get rid of the dead people.
current economist.
Because I read a lot of, especially articles that they write, op-eds, posts on social media. But like Robert Reich, Paul Krugman, I don't know. Do we consider Jerome Powell an economist? I'm not sure. Is there one person where when they talk, you really pay attention because they are so much more often right than wrong?
I am very eclectic in my reading. And so I try to read from the left, from the middle, from the right, from the top, from the bottom. I try to look at things from all different perspectives and not just from one, to look at it from a historical perspective and look at how we've dealt with these issues before, because a lot of these issues have come up before, and to put it into historical perspective. So it's really a combination of people that I look to, not just necessarily somebody that's living today, but and really, economics is really a study where it's a progression of learning from one economist and then what the work that the next economist has done on top of them, and on and on and on. And so, I'm always looking for who has new ideas and building off of that history of economics and the like.
So there isn't one person whose name you would suggest that I should really familiarize myself with their particular theories and their writing. Nobody comes to top of mind.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Well, John, AI is probably going to replace me pretty soon anyway, so it may end up being a moot point. So as you've been writing your newsletters recently, what's one thing that has really become clear to you?
Well, the thing that's been clear to me is that the markets are under threat. They're under threat by this uncertainty that has been created by the tariffs. They're under threat by the uncertainty that has been created by the attacks on the press, on freedom of speech. When you start pulling people off of the streets of the United States and putting them into confinement and then deporting them, or threatening to deport U.S. citizens for not living up to what you want them to say or be, there's even a story today that the defense secretary wants to break with the scouting movement in the United States because he believes that it's too woke, and it's ridiculous. Okay. So all of these things undermine the integrity of everything that we have as a nation. Okay. And if you look at, the value of the scouting movement and all the good that it's done, and the value that it has to the Defense Department, for example, every time that every 4 years when they have a jamboree, the Army comes in and supports it with medical facilities, and so it's acting like a city that's a temporary city where they're providing that, and so it's a great opportunity for them to practice providing care in such situations, and so there's the practical, and then there's all this ridiculous stuff that has nothing.
That's just a distraction. That
Yeah,
creates
exactly.
uncertainty. Oh my God, we've come full circle. John, thank you so much for entertaining my basic questions and explaining things to me so clearly. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and glad to be on, and thanks for having me.
And remember, if you want to look at John Lothian's writing, you can go to johnlothiannews.com. You can also, at that same site, sign up for one of his newsletters. We are going to take a break for news ourselves and be right back after this.
Hey, where's Hal Sparks? I'm not sure where he is now, but I know where you can find him Saturdays at 11. He'll be right here on WCPT 820 for the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
Suzanne Chad, political science professor from North Central College. Well, there's really nothing to talk about, Suzanne. So just, how are you? What have you been doing? Do you have any hobbies? Tell me about your hobbies.
I know. Let's just have what are you baking this weekend? There's nothing to talk about.
I know. Yeah. Good grief. Okay. Let's see. Well, let's start with the big news of the day. Trump said the bond market was getting yippy, and he doesn't like yippee. So we're pausing the tariffs. But a lot of the people I've talked to, Suzanne, say that that's not really going to reassure the business community, because it wasn't like, oh, I'm sorry, it was a bad idea, or I feel like they've accomplished what I set out to do, so, we're going to just forget about it. It was a pause. And as one business owner who was interviewed said, what does that mean? There were tariffs yesterday. There's no tariffs today. What about tomorrow? What if he changes his mind next week? I don't understand how that is going to do the business community any good. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, no, I can't, because you're right in that it won't do them any good. And I think, a lot of what we've discussed with the Trump administration in his first term, and then now in the 3 months of his second term, less than 3 months, was really was evident today, because the word we often use is volatile. And so what we've seen the president do in his discussions about tariffs, the back and forth, the mixed messages coming from his advisors, even today, those mixed messages that were coming. And then, of course, him saying this 90-day pause is there's still tariffs in place. He ups the tariffs on China. It's these 75 countries that he said have come to the table and did not retaliate. And while that may or may not be true, those countries are such a small percentage of where that trade deficit exists anyway. And so in some ways, I think what he's demonstrating is like a false victory, right? That he flexed and they caved. But I think what Chuck Schumer said today, and think of him what you will, what he said that I agree with is he said what President Trump did actually was caved, because what he realized is that he can't just steamroll his way through this agenda when the people that give him the most money are suing his White House for these tariffs. And he says he doesn't watch the market, but he said today that when the bond market started to look a little bit queasy, he decided to be flexible. And so some people might believe that messaging. I don't believe any of that messaging, that this was a flexible response. It was a cave.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And, I am not privy to any conversations that took place behind closed doors. But the fact that Elon Musk was so blunt in his social media posts of the last couple of days, calling Peter Navarro, who is supposedly the architect of the tariff program, a moron, and other words that I don't want to use, and saying that he was more stupid than a bag of bricks. And then he said, I'm sorry, I need to apologize to bricks everywhere. Yes. And that's, I can't believe that Elon didn't express his views to Donald Trump before going out and tweeting them. So I have to believe that those views of Peter Navarro's lack of competence fell on deaf ears. Trump seems to really like Peter Navarro.
Yeah, and he always has. He's been in his inner circle for quite some time. And, it's interesting. I had students this week, the past couple of weeks, have really been asking me lots of sort of technical questions about tariffs. But a student yesterday, for the first time, asked, who wrote the policy, right? Who is in charge of creating these tariff policies? And then her follow-up was, do they have the qualifications to either write these policies or know the effects of these policies? And quite honestly, I rattled off the names of the people, Peter Navarro being one of them, and my honest answer was, I don't know if they have the qualifications to appropriately write these policies and know the effects, and especially because every economist you look at on all sides of the aisle is saying these are horrible ideas. And so I think what Elon Musk might be trying to do is distance himself a bit from what he thinks is a bad idea so that he can gain more favor with the president and get more in his inner circle and push others out of that circle. And because Trump is so malleable and so easy to sort of go where the wind blows if people flatter him and tell him that he is smart, that Elon Musk knows how to play him. And I wonder if that's some of the minutia behind the scenes here.
It's interesting. Kara Swisher has been a reporter on the tech bros and the tech industry long before the rest of us knew names like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. And she said on a podcast she did recently that just like Trump, Elon Musk is an alpha, but the way he gets along with Trump is he's pretending to be a beta, to defer to Trump's brains and greatness. But she said the Elon Musk I know isn't going to be able to keep that up forever. Is it possible that this attack on Navarro might be the beginning of the end for the bromance?
That's such a good question, and I appreciate that analysis because I think that's such a great way to describe it, is that, Elon, he's playing a part in order to have the influence he so clearly wants and is helping him and benefiting his businesses, right? And so but I think the question that I've been thinking about is, does Elon burn bridges with President Trump when he starts calling out others in his inner circle? Or does that, because he's so in his ear, does he get even more inside and push others out? Like, is Navarro going to be, pushed out of the room to some extent? And I don't know the long game here, right? Like, I don't know how this goes back and forth depending on the issue and depending on the personalities. But I think that Elon Musk is playing a long game that no one else can really can see right now, including President Trump.
How much did the Wisconsin Supreme Court race result hurt Elon's standing with Republicans and Donald Trump? It wasn't, by his standards, not very much. I think I've seen most estimates are around $20 million. He put behind Brad Schimmel to try to defeat Susan Crawford. He actually went to Wisconsin, was part of a rally, wore a cheesehead hat. I mean, he really went all out, Suzanne, for this.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
Wisconsin races tend to be very close, and Suzanne Crawford winning by 10 percentage points is it's breathtaking. It's a rout in Wisconsin. Yeah. So was that just a bump in the road? I mean, Donald Trump's still obviously very much in love with Elon's money. So did it matter?
Yeah, I don't think it did, and I think that here's why: is that running up that week running up to the election, when you listen to Republican legislators when they were on the news and they were talking about the importance of the election, and they were being questioned about Elon Musk's involvement and money that he was pouring into it, especially because he now works for the government. And all of them were saying, well, but what about when it was George Soros? And what about when it was, and they're, what about J.B. Pritzker's money? And they're naming all of these Democratic sort of either elected officials or those who've given money before and doing the whataboutism, which was typical, right? And so that's kind of the narrative I've heard now is they're downplaying the fact that Musk was involved in the way that he was, or the fact that can we read any tea leaves about the midterms because of this election, and saying more, well, see, the reason she won is because of all that big money coming from the left, which, again, is a false equivalency and very much a whataboutism. But I think that's how they restructured that narrative to make it seem like it's no big deal.
I'm talking to political science professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College. We're going to continue our discussion right after a break.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez.
Really, we need to start accepting that the vision that these people have, the Heritage Foundation, Musk, Alito, and Clarence Thomas, they are prepping us for a dictatorship. We need to destroy the democracy from the inside, making it dysfunctional and not functioning at all, so that they can take it over with their form of dictatorship and make this a corporate entity.
Patty Vasquez, weeknights 5 to 7 on WCPT 820.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
If you want to buy a home or maybe refinance, do what I did. Call Team Hochberg, our trusted local lender. Gus is an electrician, income about $90,000 a year, got in touch with an online lender to get pre-approved to purchase his first home. Not the best move, according to David Hochberg. Gus was confused about the excessive closing costs he was being charged, so he called his dad for advice. Gus' father told him to stop wasting his time with online lenders and strongly recommended Gus call Team Hochberg because he listens to David on the radio and respects his knowledge and expertise. David answered Gus's questions and is helping him get that first mortgage. Gus called an online lender who tried charging him ridiculously excessive closing costs. David answered Gus's questions, explained the loan process, and is getting Gus that first mortgage. David has helped me. He's helped Gus. He's helped thousands of our listeners. But you've got to pick up the phone and make that call. 855-56-DAVID or go on your computer, 56david.com. That's 855-563-2843. Or everyone's favorite website, 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I am joined by Suzanne Chod from North Central College in Naperville, where she is a political science professor. Suzanne, you were talking about your students a few minutes ago. I'm very curious what kinds of questions they ask, what kinds of things do they want to know about when it comes to politics?
Yeah, I so appreciate that question. It's changed over time, as one might imagine. And so right now, within this semester and the past couple of months, there's a lot of technical questions they're asking. So I had a student very earnestly ask me, what is a recession? I'm hearing there's a 70% chance we're going to end up in a recession. What is that? And then what tangible effects does that have on me? And which I appreciate is that it's not just what is something that I've heard that I don't understand, but they really want to try to understand then what are these effects on me. And then there's some angst, of course, about the uncertainty. And so they're asking lots of technical questions about what are these things that are happening, and then how can we talk about, or how can you lead me through understanding the effects on me? And what's great is that when those conversations happen in our classrooms, you hear students from different perspectives and lived experiences talking about how they think it will affect them. And there's this great learning dynamic that happens where I just sit back and listen to them talk to each other and learn from each other, especially when there's people in the room in other majors. The economists in my classes are helping me out when they're explaining some of the technical things that are challenging. But they're dialed in, even though it's heavy, which I think is critically important, is when they note these things, especially the attacks on minoritized people. When that feels heavy, they still want to dive in and understand. And so I'm embracing that as long as I'm allowed to do that in the classroom still.
Yeah, really. I'm sure you saw that now Northwestern University is one of the centers of higher learning that apparently is going to have its federal grants and federal monies either that faucet is getting shut off, or it's going to be slowed, or it's going to be paused. Who knows? Yep. I mean, let's take a second to look at you and what you do. What do you think when you see this attack on universities?
It is. It's not something I ever thought when I went into this profession that I would have to worry about. And the way, especially because of the approach of our department, what we teach and how we teach it, we're unapologetic about the way we talk about our democracy and how people have different experiences in it and why that matters. And while right now we are allowed to say those things in our classroom, Ohio, they can't do that anymore. And I worry. I worry because while we are a private college, our students get federal financial aid. And if that reservoir is shut off, that compromises North Central's ability to serve their students still. And so it's a delicate balance right now as I think about what does my job look like? What does my role look like? And also as a researcher, I can't rely on federal grant money anymore because of the type of research that I do. And the type of research I want to engage in with students. And there's a couple of my colleagues across the college whose grants have been canceled, whether through the National Science Foundation or the money, even if they get the grant from the NEH, the money might not be there because there's no staff left at the NEH. And a private college in particular, not a big research institution, relies on that grant money to do good work. And so I fear that I'm in a place in my career after 20 years in higher ed that I have to fundamentally rethink the way that I work as a professional if I can't rely on federal funding to do my work.
I know. I heard the chancellor speak from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she's in the sciences, and she said that she's very worried that with all of this cut in funding, that we will essentially fall behind. Well, she was referring to the sciences. She said she is worried that the United States is going to find itself falling so far behind that even if, like 3 or 4 years from now, this money is restored, that we may be so far behind that she said we potentially could never catch up. She said at the University of Illinois, they actually have formed a task force where they're looking at all the things funded by federal money. And, what can they make up with philanthropy? If the money goes away, what can they make up from other sources? And what are the absolute most critical areas? If we can't fund everything, what do we need to fund so that we don't, 4 years from now, find ourselves so far behind that it's a lost cause? I mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah. It is, and I appreciate that perspective so much because this is where we think about the long game again versus the short game, is that right now these decisions that were promised to be, delivered on the campaign trail and now we're seeing being delivered, they feel maybe like a short-term gain for people who don't think that certain types of research should be funded or that political science is a relevant discipline, for example. But the point about how we are then going to be further behind in scientific innovation, medical science, and advancements when we're already behind in those areas, but we're supposed to be the world's leader. That's the long game that's being missed, especially because of the way that they're control effing every grant. And if the word female is in it, it automatically doesn't, get scrubbed from the website or doesn't get funded. The word transition is one of those words, which also refers to, and some money was cut for programs that talk about how you transition from, especially for those who have developmental disabilities, how they transition out of school into the real world. So the way in which this is being done has significant consequences. And one of the things as a social scientist is that, and I was talking to my students about this week, is there's a difference between deciding, okay, we're going to have scientific innovation and we're going to do it because we can. Like, let's talk with the Jurassic Park. We can bring back dinosaurs because of the scientific innovation. But what we do is we ask, but should we do that? Mm-hmm. What are the consequences of that? And so there's also with social science funding being cut and human behavior funding being cut, we also miss the can we do something and then the should we do something, which are both vitally important.
Yeah. And I would imagine that the kind of research that political scientists do is much more threatening to the current administration than whether or not, we need to measure, marine currents kind of thing.
Yes. And this is honestly why political science as a discipline has been under attack by the National Science Foundation for decades, is the types of things that we study and the types of criticisms that we levy because we observe the world as it is and we use science we pursue scientific truth to explain the world as it is. It's not always pretty when you hold that mirror up. And so I think there's a lot of discrediting of our discipline, but especially to your point, because not everything that we study is going to say we should reinforce the status quo. I mean, our discipline at the beginning was let's do what we need to do to maintain the state, but not criticize the state as it exists. But the framers told us that most patriotic thing you can do is criticize the state to make it better. And that's what our discipline does, is we interrogate, and hopefully we interrogate to try to make it better.
Along these same lines, when you have your discussions with your students and they want to know, like, what is a recession, I would imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, that one of their main questions is, am I going to get a job when I graduate? Maybe I should change fields. Who's going to be hiring? Where is the economy going to be bringing on new workers? Do you get that?
That's right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, right after the executive order went out to close the Department of Education, the first question I had that morning was, what happens to my student loans?
Oh.
And who's going to manage them? And what does that look like? And will I have to pay them back? And what's going to happen to the interest rate? And are they going to still have them? Title IX requires that there's no discrimination of protected classes for financial aid. And now we know that those regulations have changed. And so the LGBTQ community is not considered a protected class under Title IX in that way. So there are significant challenges just for the financial aid component. And then to the point you just made, I have a first-year student that is already thinking about what she's going to do in 4 years and is like, but wait, what can I do? What will the economy look like when I'm trying to get out of here and get a job? There's so much uncertainty, and I just do my best to try to explain it and help them through it. But there is such a sense of heaviness and angst because of the volatility.
Yeah. Well, when you give them advice, here's just a thought of mine. Don't suggest that they might want to switch to a journalism major, okay? Because if you want to talk about a profession that's shrinking, you are talking about that one.
Yes, and under attack, right? I mean, it's really, I hear that, yes. Maybe I'll tell them to be journalists, though, just as an act of resistance.
Well, that's, and look at the success the AP had in court. I mean, they went to court because Trump wouldn't let them into the White House briefing room because they refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And a Trump-appointed judge ruled in favor of the Associated Press, saying, dude, if you're going to let journalists in, you can't say, well, you can't come in because I don't like your what you write. He said that's First Amendment stuff. So,
That's right.
But we'll see. When it gets to the Supreme Court, I'm sure they'll find a way to reverse it, and,
Oh, gosh, so much is going to come up there, and we'll have to see what that looks like.
I know. It's going to be really interesting considering that not a lot of us have a lot of faith in how they're going to rule. Though strangely, and we don't need to get into this conversation, Amy Coney Barrett has been surprising people so much. She's been ruling in such a way that Trump people perceive as anti-Trump. I heard that she's really getting dragged in far right-wing media circles. So let's hope she can stand up to that. We need to take a break.
I think that's right.
I am going to continue my conversation with Suzanne Chod. You know, I want to get into what's going on at the Smithsonian and the changes they're making. And dear God, the Kennedy Center. We'll be talking about lots of stuff when we come right back after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by political science professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College. You know, Usha, I'm not quite sure how she says her first name. Usha Vance gave an interview to a European publication, and she said that her husband, J.D. Vance, was lonely. He was lonely, Suzanne. And I mention this only because, maybe he's not as involved in the Trump administration as he would like to be. But Trump did sign an executive order that was specifically used to empower his vice president, J.D. Vance, to remove from all federal properties references to institutional racism, sexism, or other elements of history that cast the country in a, negative light. And you may have read that, it went down and it came back up, but it didn't come back up exactly the way it was before. There were references to Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad that were on the National Park Service webpage. Talk about that, if you would, Suzanne.
Yeah, I appreciate talking about this because it's been, I think a lot of academics in particular, but hopefully anyone who is a patron of history has been bothered by the Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History executive order at the end of last month. And to your point, what it does is it allows J.D. Vance and the director of the Office of Management Budget basically decide what gets in and what gets out, what gets highlighted or scrubbed from either like federally sponsored historical websites or at these museums. And so this was what broke in the Washington Post this week. And apparently, and I had missed this, and a lot of us did, is that the changes on the Underground Railroad page go back to February, really early in the Trump administration, where they took off the picture of Harriet Tubman and had her in a smaller picture with a series of other people that were on stamps, and rewrote the narrative of the Underground Railroad to focus on things like the brave people who were for liberty and equality, but not using the type of language that talks about the struggle of enslaved people or
my understanding is that the word slavery doesn't even appear on the new.
No, it did not. Yeah, it did not. And so I actually was looking at this today because the reports are that the old version is back up. And the National Park Service said that. That's why I literally just saw this today, and I haven't been able to go on the website yet to take a look at it because my presumption is that since nobody knew about this and it happened in February, the Washington Post breaks the story, as there should be. There's tons of backlash. The National Park Service is reporting that they had no idea the changes were made and they were not sanctioned by the National Park Service. And as of today, the report suggests, so as I said, I haven't gone on the website, that the old content is now back up. But I think the point of all of this remains, which is that this happened a month and a half ago, and it wasn't until journalists, to your point in our last segment, did a little digging, and it became front and center, and there was such an outcry about it that the real history was put back on the National Park Service website. And so if that is where we sit now, is that these things are going to be happening in, a cloak and dagger type of activity to scrub these websites of the real history, and it only is when journalists are going to comb through and uncover it, or maybe this is a project for educators to do, are we going to know exactly the damage that's being done to telling our true U.S. history? And I'll just note that educators, particularly history educators, use these resources to teach students. And if those resources don't exist that teach students our real history, it significantly compromises our ability to inform and produce citizens. But that's exactly the point of why they're doing it.
You know, Rachel Maddow pointed out recently that a lot of times when stuff like this comes to light, you know, there is backtracking. Remember when the curriculum that taught about the Tuskegee Airmen was removed from the Air Force Academy, and there was a lot of reporting and hue and cry, and I'm sorry, that was just like a clerical error. We didn't mean to do that. It's back now. No big deal. But as Rachel Maddow said, there's a lot more of this stuff going on than the media can catch. And it only seems to be when the media catches it and says, whoa, what's going on here, that all of a sudden it gets undone. So how much is not being caught? How much is still in place?
Yeah, this is, I don't know. And I think the scariest part about this is that even when the Navajo Code Talkers information was taken down, then after the outcry, that was all, the Pentagon restored those histories. So I would love to see, although this would be so laborious, but if we could, figure out a way to do it, is to look at all of these sites and look at all of these, look at the museums, go read the plaques, compare to before, and see how much of this is being done. Because this is sort of the strategy, right, of the administration is we're going to just do a whole bunch of stuff so no one can keep up with it. And, okay, if someone catches us, then we'll be like, oh, we made an oopsie. It was an error. Because what they haven't done is doubled down on it, which I find interesting, is that it would have been on brand for them to say, nope, we passed this executive order, and this executive order says we cannot have things that are divisive or don't talk about freedom, liberty, and equality when we talk about history. And so, we're going to leave it off. I don't know where the win is here because they're not doubling down, they're backing down.
Well, don't you think, because let's frame this in terms of self-interest, because I find that usually is a pretty clear explanation. J.D. Vance would love to be president. Maybe that's why the executive order to do all this stuff was given to him. Hey, we get rid of all this DEI stuff and Vance has to take the rap. J.D. Vance wants to be president. Do you think when he's running for president, he wants to lose every potential African-American voter because he wiped their history out of the government? I don't.
No, I hear what you're saying, especially the gains that were made with black men that the Republican Party, with all men, though, with black men and Latin Hispanic men in particular in this last election cycle, and young men, right? And I think this is the thing. J.D. Vance has hung his hat on this issue as far back as he ran for Senate in Ohio, as far back as before that, but definitely when he was running for Senate in Ohio. And I think that empowering him, there's two things that happen here with his executive order. It empowers him to be front and center of an issue that he thinks will benefit him because he thinks it helps get him to where he is. But I also wonder, because so few people know about what's happening with this executive order, unless someone brings it to the attention of minoritized people to say, by the way, this person is erasing you from the historical narrative, which barely has you in it in a whitewashed historical narrative in the first place. It's going to take someone telling communities that because we're not going to know. And then it's whether or not those things matter to them based on a whole host of other factors, depending on where we are in an election cycle.
Yeah. Well, I have found that when it comes to predicting how, say, elected Republican officials are going to take a stand on a certain issue, that, yes, they're afraid of Trump's ire, and yes, they're afraid of Musk's money, And that's really important to them because I have observed that nothing seems to be more important to them than their reelection because, they're really, really so good a person and they're so great at this job that it would be a shame if somebody else did it. So I really have to look out for me so that I can look out for them. But I think with these marches and these town halls where they're getting screamed at, I think at least a few of them are now thinking, doesn't do me any good. Musk's money didn't help Brad Schimmel. And yet my constituents, I know they're mad and I know they're going to be voting. Maybe I ought to rethink my stand on a couple of these issues. I think self-interest, whether it's J.D. Vance or whether it's a Republican congressperson or senator, I think that if you look at anything they do in the light of how does this help them, I think generally you can connect the dots.
No, you're absolutely right. We talk about reelection is the word we use as the proximate goal for members of government, which means it's the first thing that has to be achieved to achieve any other goal. And you describe, the goal, you said it, like they have to win re-election and get in so they can serve the people. At least that's the way that they phrase it, right? So they
Nobody
are
does it better.
Self-interest is rational. Well, that's exactly right. And actually, congressional scholars suggest that the way the House and Senate operate, there's no better institution to serve the re-election interests of members because of the way that they're allowed to grandstand and credit claim and position take and raise money and all the things that help them get reelected. The institution props them up to do that. And then on top of all of this, to your point about, Musk's money and Trump's endorsements, is as long as it serves their reelection interests to continue to hitch their wagon to the president, they will unapologetically do that. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be the voters that are going to require, ask, demand for something different. And that's going to happen in the primary because Republican voters aren't going to vote for the Democrat in a general election for the most part in these congressional races, especially because of the way House districts are drawn. So I've been thinking a lot about the midterms, not which party is going to win, but I'm really thinking about, what is the Republican messaging around the primaries, depending upon how popular or unpopular Donald Trump becomes within his party and how that changes the strategy of incumbents who have to decide whether or not to continue to keep their wagon hitched because of who they might draw against them in a primary.
Ooh, I want to talk to you more about that. We have to take a break. Political science professor Suzanne Chod and I will be right back after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Recently, I read that an unnamed Republican said that, if the midterms were right now, we would just be devastated. But, it's not till next year. Everybody's going to forget about the turmoil of right now. I'm talking to political science professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College. And she mentioned before we went to break that she's been thinking about the kind of messages we might hear from Republicans. And I would love to get your thoughts on that, Suzanne.
Yeah, what I think about this is so interesting, too, is there's been so much talk about, what's the Democratic messaging going to be? And while that's important, we're not spending enough time talking about what the Republican messaging is going to be. Because the trends we know is that the party that's in the White House loses seats in a midterm. We call it midterm loss. It has happened every election except for two since the 1950s. So we know the Republican Party is going to lose seats just because that's the theory. The theory predicts that. And the margin of the majority is so slim. And so the quote you just gave about how the Republicans saying if the midterms right now, we would get shellacked if we use one of President Obama's terms. It's funny when he says that there's a short attention span because my projection is if we continue to see what we're seeing, it's going to be worse for them in a year, not better.
I agree with that, because person was commenting like the turmoil we're having now is somehow going to get magically resolved and we're going to be living in a different world in 2026. Right. And I don't think that's true.
No, I think you're right. And especially I think that's the tagline of, there's going to be some short-term pain for long-term gain, and thinking that somehow short-term pain is a month or even a year, but not the type of reorganizing of the global economy that Donald Trump is suggesting is going to happen with the tariffs. So for Republicans who are thinking about, we'll ride this wave and in a year no one will remember. Well, the primary season begins in less than a year, which means that the party and candidates are already right now thinking about who should run, where they should run, and how they should run. Now, they can't do too much strategizing because, again, things are so volatile. But to suggest that there's all this time and that things will get better and that the messaging and strategy will get easier is so short-sighted and so dangerous for the Republicans to maintain a tenuous majority that if I were running the Republican Party, or a state party for that matter, I would be having those conversations and strategy sessions right now.
Two things about that. I read a survey of Republican voters who said that they don't understand why Trump's doing what he's doing because they voted for him to bring down inflation and make eggs cheaper. And it doesn't seem to the Republican voters who were surveyed that either of those two things seems to be a priority. So would you start there if you're a Republican?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if you're trying to oust an incumbent, you want to run in the primary as an opponent, that you don't want to completely alienate Donald Trump and the big swath of his voters that still are very loyal. But I think there's a hedging where you say, listen, the Republicans in Congress did not do enough. They didn't have a big enough majority. They weren't strong enough to work with the president in order to do all of these things at once. Right? Because I think part of the messaging, since Congress has done almost nothing and let Donald Trump do everything, if I'm running as an opponent, if I'm running as an outsider, I'm saying, listen, I appreciate what the party is trying to do. I think we should work harder and work smarter and more with the president as opposed to rolling over and doing less. And if we do that, we can drive down the price of eggs and we can make things more affordable and we can do this, that, and the other. And honestly, maybe that's what the current Republicans should be saying. But if I'm the challenger, that's what I'm leading with.
In the Senate, a number of Republicans joined with Democrats to pass a rule that said that this power that Trump has, it was specifically to Canada, to impose tariffs on Canada because tariffs are supposed to come from Congress, and that they were going to, whatever rule Trump was using to do that, they were going to eliminate that. And then when Mike Johnson got wind of that, he changed the procedures. He couldn't stop the measure from coming over, but he changed the procedures of the congressional calendar in such a way that Senate proposal would never get the time it needs to be considered and voted on. And now there's reporting just this morning that in this budget bill, there's language that House Republicans put into the new budget bill that bans the House from voting to terminate Trump's emergency declaration used to impose the tariffs. What's going on with Mike Johnson? I mean, he's not the vice president. He doesn't really have a shot at the presidency, but he is the biggest toady that I've seen in political life in a very, very long time. And I've seen a lot of toadies.
You have. No, this is so interesting. So one of the things as someone who studies institutions and studies Congress in particular is we those of us that do it often say, members of Congress, especially congressional leadership, when they can't get the outcome that they want with consensus building, they just change the rules. You just change the rules and you get the outcome you want. If you can't win with the rules that exist and you're in the leadership, you change them. And the Senate is a perfect example of this. With the nuclear option that Harry Reid invoked and then was extended later on to get Gorsuch on the bench, to then eliminate the filibuster for Supreme Court justices, right? So, but it's short-sighted because if one party gets to use it, so does the other. So now, if this actually happens, right, if these changes that you're describing, because I hadn't heard about this, if this happens, you think about what's going to happen when the Democrats are in the majority, right? I mean, you change the rules, and it serves you now, but it doesn't necessarily serve you when you're in the minority. And we're coming into a midterm cycle where you have a very small majority, and you're likely to lose seats, if not lose the chamber. It's sort of playing with fire in that respect. But to your question more about what is sort of why is Mike Johnson doing this? I think, when you think about where he came from, right? He wasn't in the leadership. He kind of comes out of nowhere. He's now the most powerful person in Congress. And to the point you made, he's more powerful in a lot of ways than J.D. Vance. And I think he's flexing. I think he's flexing because he's ambitious. I think he's flexing because he has a taste of power. And I think he likes that he gets to be in Trump's inner circle.
I don't know if you saw that picture from Trump's airplane. You know, Trump is sitting there. Elon Musk is sitting there. One or two other people are sitting there. And Mike Johnson is like in the row behind them, just like he's turned around. He's like kneeling on the seat and he's sticking his head there like, me too. I'm part of the group too.
Don't forget about
me too, me too.
Yeah, and as long as he continues to do the president's bidding, he will get a seat on that plane, right? And if I were him, I wouldn't want to not have a seat on that plane either. And because also he knows how tenuous the speakership can be based on the volatility of the last couple of years, he has to continue to do the president's bidding or else he might not be the speaker anymore.
I suppose.
I'm sorry, Joan. Did I make you depressed?
I suppose. I mean, I do think he likes being in a position of power. And I guess what you're saying is the only way he stays there is by being the toady that I see him being. Is that kind of the bottom line here?
Oh, yeah. And that, yes, and we see when Kevin McCarthy did not do that, we saw what happened to him. I mean, there's no better story. Or we can go way far back to when John Boehner was still the speaker and polarization was ramping up. And he was like, I don't want to be a part of this. Or Paul Ryan thinking that when he was speaker, he could rein in Donald Trump and then ended up not as speaker or even in Congress anymore. So we see what's happened to Republican speakers, either pre, during, or post, and then during Trump again, that if they do not do what the president wants, then they are not going to be speaker anymore.
Okay.
So we're stuck with Mike Johnson. We're stuck with him, but the Republicans they are getting what they want, and so they're not unhappy.
There's just, I mean, you know, there's a lot of politicians I don't like. I think Lindsey Graham is like a human sock puppet. There's lots of politicians where I don't respect them. I don't agree with them. But Mike Johnson actually gives me the creeps. There's just something that makes my skin crawl when I read about something he's doing. Is it just me? I don't know. Maybe it is just me.
I don't know. I think there is something very opportunistic about his demeanor, behavior, and approach. And to be honest, I don't fault him for being opportunistic because that's the nature of politics. Mm-hmm. But I think there was something earnest still about Kevin McCarthy. He still saw his job as speaker as he was an institutional patriot, right? That he really believed in the House and the role of the speaker and that their job is to advance good legislation for the people. And when he refused to maneuver, he was no longer speaker. And so I think Johnson is the antithesis of that in ways that I can see why, to use your language, that gives you the creep, gives you the ick.
Well, next time we talk, Suzanne, I want a deep analysis of why J.D. Vance is so lonely, okay?
So lonely. Yes,
I know. I'm giving you time, you know, because that I think is going to take some deep study. Ugh.
I'll see what I come up with.
Thank you. Suzanne Chod, political science professor, North Central College. Always a pleasure. And I really do. I can't stop thinking about how lonely J.D. Vance is. But you know what? That's probably a me problem.
We'll tease it out next time. Thank you, Jen.
Yes. Thank you. That's going to do it for me today. Of course, Patty Vasquez is going to be here momentarily. She's going to be talking to Aaron Reese Bozeman, director of The Lifespan of a Fact. That is going to be a theatrical presentation. Choose Views is tomorrow at 6 a.m. Michelle Peltier is going to be in for Richard. She's going to be taking calls and talking to Woodstock City Council member Natalie Ziemba. And we have a really good show planned for you tomorrow here on my little neck of the woods. We haven't talked to Peter Giangreco in a while. Joe Brancatelli from Joe Sent Me is going to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, that does it for me. Have a great evening, folks. Take care of yourself. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Good night.